Hey guys, and welcome to Should You Buy It, where all we do is talk a little bit about the game and whether or not we think it's worth the cost.
In this episode, we'll be playing D&D Dark Alliance, a co-op third-person dungeon crawler experience that takes place in the D&D universe.
So the first question we always cover in these videos is what stage of development is the game in? And in this case, D&D Dark Alliance is currently in full release and available on PC as well as Xbox and PlayStation for $40.
So what exactly is the game? Well, D&D Dark Alliance is a mix of several different games, all squished into one. The best way I can think to describe it to you would be a third-person Diablo. You'll progress through the game's currently 21 different maps in order to obtain gear and level up your character.
First up, let's talk about the story elements, as we know that's important for many of our viewers. The story that this game is based on is genuinely pretty great if you know a little bit about D&D. That being said, the storytelling within the game isn't exactly what we would call amazing. They give you some very creative and solid cutscenes once in a while, but as far as the actual plot goes, there really isn't much apart from the intro prologue that you're gonna get out of the game.
Next up, let's talk about the progression systems. In total, there are 3 major ways to increase the strength of your character. First up is through your gear. As you complete missions, you will unlock several different pieces of gear of different rarities. Each piece of gear will then have randomized stats and be attached to a specific set with different set bonuses. These aren't anything too crazy, and aside from 1 or 2 exceptions, these are additional stat bonuses like 10% additional critical strike damage or 50% lightning resist bonus. Most of these bonuses won't really change the way you play your character, but they will increase damage output or damage reduction.
After that, you will be able to upgrade your character through gold. Gold can be spent on consumable upgrades or moves. Consumable upgrades are pretty self-explanatory, but moves are essentially your combos and abilities. Just to give you some examples, you might get a move that allows you to do a high amount of damage in a very short burst, or cast a long-range dark sphere of magical energy. Within the move tree, however, there are 2 abilities that can replace your starting ones. For the rogue that I happened to be playing, there was a vampiric frenzy and an AoE fear.
The last and final in-game progression system was the feats, which essentially acts as passive bonuses to your character. This could be anything from damage resistance to reduced prices at the upgrade shop. In the end though, this was the most disappointing system within the game, as if you have ever played D&D, then you know that feats can do a lot more than just give you lame passives like 5% extra damage or 7% gold drop bonus.
Okay, so what about the gameplay? The gameplay was, well, okay-ish. What we mean here is that while each character does have slightly different movesets, most of them boil down to just spam quick attack or heavy attack. Yes, you can block or dodge, which is more important at the harder difficulties, but not so important that I felt like you weren't still just button mashing half the time. Aside from that, you have 2 ability cooldowns and an ultimate. Your ability cooldowns are the 2 abilities that you choose for your character before the start of each run, and your ultimate is one specific thing that you will not be able to change. The ultimate meter is charged through performing combos in combat, and thus the higher the combo, the faster it will charge.
The abilities are of course all inspired by D&D, but don't necessarily function the same way that you think they would. For an example here, in D&D you can cast an ability called Healing Spirit, which summons a fey creature that can be moved each turn to heal any allies within its radius. While in D&D Dark Alliance, it just puts a circle on the ground that heals people that stand in it. If anything, this was a great way to take amazingly cool D&D abilities and simplify them so much so that they become generic abilities from any other game.
Now, I feel it is very important to talk about how the actual combat feels. This is hard to explain, but we will do our very best. The combat honestly feels very, very clunky and pretty unresponsive. When you hit something, sometimes it feels like you didn't hit it at all, or that it had no impact whatsoever. This could be partly due to the fact that we were pretty sure they're using some kind of peer-to-peer system for the game, so anyone that was not the host will get this on an even worse scale. It also seems like the game wants you to be very strategic with your combat, but most of the time, and especially with a full party, you end up just button mashing someone down as a group.
So as you progress through each stage, you will come across checkpoints that will offer you two choices, the first of which is a short rest that refills your consumables and acts as a spawn point. The second choice you are given is the ability to increase the loot at the end of the stage. The only problem with this system is that you never really want to take the short rest, because if you do wipe, you can basically just sprint past all the mobs back to where you were. Now if someone in your party does go down, you are able to pick them back up. This is kind of cheesy though, as the person performing the revive is unable to die, and it creates a cycle of being able to seemingly never fully wipe, as long as someone has at least started the animation.
Lastly, we need to talk about the game's AI and bosses. We only have one real issue with the bosses, and that's how generic they feel and look. Aside from a couple bosses, of course, they all feel like a higher stat version of the monsters you've already been fighting. For an example here, the final boss of one stage is a big giant brute who legitimately only uses the same abilities as his weaker counterparts that you've already been beating. There is literally zero change here, aside from the fact that he hits harder and has more health. To us, this just seems like simply lazy design, as most bosses are just reskinned higher stat versions of the mobs you've already been taking out.
So now it's time for the pros and cons section for the video. First up for the pros is that in this day and age, a promise of no microtransactions is always a good thing. Thankfully, these devs have gone out of their way to promise this, but did mention that they were planning on having paid DLC in the future, so do keep this in mind if you do plan on playing this for the long haul. Next up is one of the biggest pros for us, and that was the cutscenes. These aren't exactly like watching a movie or anything, but they were definitely much higher quality than the rest of the game was. We will just say, without spoiling too many of them, that they were all thoroughly enjoyable and had the option to skip for the second time around. After that is that we do have to admit that this game has a great concept. The idea of a third-person roguelike in a D&D universe is just awesome to us. However, they just seem to have poorly executed on the idea, which is why we have the game that we do. Finally, for the pros is that it is great that they have cross-platform in the game. However, just keep in mind that there was no way for us to type in the game to our teammates. As PC players, this just seems like it would be a standard. However, we were unable to figure out how to do this and were forced to just use voice chat.
Now for the cons. First up on our list is just how buggy the game is and how many server problems we encountered. Now granted, we did play this game at launch, so there was going to be some server issues and we understand that, but we do believe there are some peer-to-peer problems that the game has internally, so they definitely need to fix that. Aside from that, on the bug side, there were tons and tons of different issues we came across. Just to give you an example here, there was one time we were playing online with a random player and he got trapped outside of the final boss zone and had to watch us take out the final boss while he went and took a smoke break. Next up is that the feat system, quite frankly, sucks. If you've ever played D&D, you know how important a feat is. Well, in this game, they decided to take these awesome feats that you had available to you in D&D and essentially just make them little tiny stat bonuses. For an example here, you could get 5% damage, and that's just not very exciting compared to being able to cast spells from a class that you're not. After that is that abilities are quite frankly a bit lackluster. I mean, you only get 4 per character in the D&D universe. Considering there are 362 baseline spells just in the base game for D&D 5e, they had so much to play with and create, but ended up only using about 4 or 5 per entire character, not just in their abilities, but in their move tree included with that. Fourth on our list is that the combat feels unresponsive and clunky. I'm not going to bore you with the details here as we've already covered a ton about the combat, just know that it really just doesn't feel very good when you're actually playing it. After that is that the AI just quite frankly feels stupid. I mean, we're talking about a game coming out in 2021 here, and the AI feels like it came from 2001. Another con we have is that the bosses were just pretty bland. I mean, there's only so many of them in the game, and I don't understand why they couldn't at least add some new moves to them, considering that some of these bosses are straight up copies of the default mobs you've already been fighting. Finally, is that this game was clearly not designed for PC players. Just to give you a huge example here, the PC controls felt absolutely horrible to learn and play with and never really felt truly comfortable to me. Aside from that, they don't even have an in-game text chat for you to use. The only way to communicate with your team is going to be over comms, so if you don't have a mic or just don't like talking to random people you don't know, then you're kind of going to be out of luck if you're a PC player.
So now it's time for the rating for the game, and when we rate games, we want to get 1 hour of enjoyment out of every $1 that we spend on the game. So for this game in particular, in D&D Dark Alliance, we would want to get roughly 40 hours of enjoyment out of the $40 that we spent. And after putting 24 played hours into this game, we give it 4 out of 10 potatoes.
So if we're being completely honest here, D&D Dark Alliance wasn't necessarily that bad of a game. It just feels like the developers completely rushed out an unfinished product, and now we're stuck with half of a game. Now add a $40 price tag onto a game that's not been completed, and you get yourself a 4 out of 10 potatoes. That being said, it's not necessarily the worst game we have ever played, and we did enjoy it for a good few hours. If you're on the fence after this video and still want to know if you should buy it, we would highly recommend you check it out on Xbox Game Pass, as after a month of access to this game, you are probably going to move on anyways. With all of that being said though, we feel it is safe to say that D&D Dark Alliance is probably not worth the cost.
So before you guys go, we would like to mention that as of today, we are launching our YouTube membership program. If you don't know how this works, there's a join button located directly under this video in the bottom right corner, where you are able to become a member and help support our channel for as little as 99 cents. If you still want to support our channel without spending money, you can always smash that like button and subscribe if you haven't already, or just consider joining our Discord channel where you can get to know us and other members of our community. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next time.